for me, when I started out in my career, it wasn't about entrepreneurship really. It was about making Sacramento the best place that it could be. And I saw entrepreneurship as that driver going forward. I didn't know it was entrepreneurship is economic development and all the jargon that we now use. I just saw the impact and connection to people trying to build a better community. And so when I, saw Laura and Jeff, I love that she brings up the suits because I used to suit up all the time. And she's like, people in the startup community don't wear suits. I was like, well, I kind of need to go wear this sometimes. And so naturally I've dressed down in the ecosystem.
We believe that anyone, anywhere can make startups. After spending more than a decade building our own company, we've learned a ton. We've mentored founders and built startup communities. We've helped craft government policies, and we've also invested in businesses. Some that succeeded and some that didn't. We've helped thousands of startup founders, funders, and facilitators. We're inspired by their dreams and determination. Our goal is to travel across America and meet as many as we can, tell their story, and share their lessons. We're on a mission to help you succeed, to show you that you aren't crazy, you aren't alone, you really can do this. We're here to make startups together.
Thank you for taking the time. We are trying to visit 24 startup ecosystems in 2024 as part of our exercise to get to know really sort of the people behind the scenes that are making these ecosystems happen, the founders that they support, develop a little bit of a unique understanding of the challenges that you have faced in your ecosystem. And what we found is that everybody in our field has kind of come up with some really unique insights on how they approach. And we're hoping that this series will allow us to sort of gather those and find the commonalities, yes, but also maybe bring some new things to light that will help every other community succeed in what they're doing. And really more than anything, it's meant to just be a celebration of how important this work is in allowing each of our communities to thrive and be a unique place to live. What is the hardest part of being a founder in Sacramento, and what's the best part?
Well, I don't see anything hard. I think it's just a perspective of what the challenge is. The biggest one, just to be honest, is funding, access to funding. Mm-hmm. And being in this ecosystem, it's a bigger challenge compared to, let's say, San Francisco, where maybe you have more access to funding. With that said, you get to be very clever, very ingenious, very capital intensive, and that's great, right? Because I think to be a successful startup, it's good to approach it in a lean way, because then you really focus on solving the problem and you don't get distracted with all the excesses that sometimes more money gives you. The best part to me is just enjoying the journey. I mean, the people that you meet, I've been very fortunate with Pair Anything to not have to do it alone. And that just makes the journey more enriching, and being connected with this amazing resources. I'm just forever grateful for that.
Great. One of the things that we're trying to ask every region that we go to is like kind of the same question over again, and we can just kind of do a reel at the end. And so I'd be curious to know from all three of you, if there were 3 words that you would use to describe the Sacramento entrepreneurial ecosystem, what would those words be?
Well, so one that comes to me, and this is core to like my values, and I know other, it's been a word that's kind of been thrown around from one of our kind of entrepreneurial leaders, Mark Haney. Love, I think, is a core to who I am and how we serve. I think that's the connection piece, that when you hear like the people, mm-hmm. That's one of the core components. I would say like collaborative or connective, like I think is a really key element. And that's, a power of being a smaller city to a degree, obviously bigger than other cities, but also smaller than some. And so I think that connective element of things. And then third one, you're really testing me here. I think, I don't know if service is the right word, but it kind of ties to what Laura was saying. It's not transactional in nature. It's really like trying to build for the future. So like I say service because it's like working together to do something, knowing that you might not you're not asking for the reciprocity to get something back. And so I think that's another key word. So I'd say just like with that service mindset.
What's the population base in Sacramento?
2.7 million.
And how many square miles?
It's a 6-county MSA. So within like the city of Sacramento, I believe it's like just north of 500,000. So, but we've had growing suburbs, and I know we're talking about the 3 words, but I think that's one of the challenges as a region is we're very spread out. And so you've had these communities pop up all around, which is awesome. And so it's like, how can we connect those and, make sure that those resources that say are in Elk Grove are accessible to people that live up the hill and vice versa. So
Yeah, and we always refer to it as the Greater Sacramento region.
Region.
So there isn't anything there's not very much that's just focused on Sacramento, and we all work in all around those counties.
It's interesting, like San Francisco, innovation capital, but then you also have Silicon Valley, and it's a mega region here. I like that concept of the Greater Sacramento because you have the city of Sacramento, like the city of Rancho Cordova, Fourth Wave is partnering with this new Minerva verse that's in that city, and then Folsom also has their own kind of micro startup ecosystem.
Okay.
So it's great to have this Greater Sacramento community or identity, but then you can dive deeper into the cities and get some local support. And I find that very nourishing because for all of us, we're at different stages and we're kind of also part of this little micro communities.
Yeah.
And it's nice. I think it's inspiring to have the local city government kind of step up and put hard dollars in investing in these ventures.
I'm curious, and I'm going a little bit off script here, but already 2 cities in, I'm seeing this common thread that there's this comparison being made. Everybody has exposure to Silicon Valley, Bay Area, and there's this perception that I'm seeing that there's this sort of competitiveness that exists within that, and there's a lack of collaboration maybe that exists within that. But we all also look at that as like somewhat of an epicenter of, there's a lot of success and a lot of big companies. And so I'm curious, any thoughts you have on this notion of, I think a lot of people were taking pride in this collaborative, connected ecosystem, but we also live in a really hyper-competitive world. And just your thoughts around that, and do we need to embrace more of that competitive culture?
I can take a stab at it. I mean, my first thought is like, it's hard to compare communities now to what Silicon Valley is now. Like, I wasn't around when Silicon Valley took off, so I can't really speak to if it was collaborative or not. And so I think to really have that comparison is drawing where ecosystems are in terms of their emergence. I mean, in terms of competitiveness, I think there is, value in creating some of that environment. But I think when I look at it from an ecosystem builder, you really want to create that collaborative tissue so it's more efficient for an entrepreneur to navigate that journey. Whereas I think when I think of, say, Silicon Valley, Bay Area, is the vastness of it that it's hard to navigate. And I haven't lived in that ecosystem, so this is only an outsider's perspective. But is that like very transactional nature that like I'm getting what I want and moving in that. And that's where I think people might see that competitiveness component versus really trying to invest in the community and the identity around that. So I think there is, some value in trying to create that opportunity. But I think, one of that is, capital is one of the larger things in that ecosystem. So it's like the scarcity that we maybe feel here, even in that ecosystem, there's more entrepreneurs starting up, right? And so it's still of that same mindset. But I mean, I don't want Sacramento to be the Silicon Valley. That's not my vision for what we want to be. We have very different types of industries that we're focused on, and like foundations, and I think like values as a community. And so I think that like to our ethos, like that's for me one of the the tug and pulls actually for our region was with a lot of Bay Area transplants. Like, how does that change the culture of a city? One, in terms of how we build startups and community, to kind of seeing that vision for our region. But I don't know if that directly answered your question, but so.
Well, and I don't think, this collaborative nature, it's in the culture of Sacramento, whether you're in startup or restaurant or neighborhood, that it's just, it makes it a more pleasant experience for me to do business here. And I grew up in the Bay Area. I've lived in Orlando. I've lived in Salt Lake City, and Sacramento has something really, really unique. I didn't grow up here. Cameron did. So he probably doesn't even know that it's all that different. So, although you lived in Australia somewhere, right? I don't know how.
What are the main industries here, either that have been here or that you see emerging?
Government.
Yes. So, I mean, our biggest shift is how do we transition out of government being the largest employer in a region to establishing industries. And that's like to one of Laura's points, that we, as an ecosystem builder and really looking at entrepreneurship as economic development, we're trying to like level that conversation up. It's always been kind of grassroots. And so it's like, how do we become more of a formal part of that strategy going forward? And, as a region, we've, talked a lot about food and ag, which is a lot of research that's coming out of UC Davis. Similarly, health and life sciences, we have 4 large, health systems here and have some capital investments in the city of Sacramento to spur that. And then we've talked about like zero emission vehicle and clean technology. But I mean, we are seeing a variety of types of, startups across, from SaaS to whatever that might be. But from clustering, from assets and workforce, those are the ones that we've started to see.
My unique perspective is that coming from the Bay Area and here, Sacramento is a phenomenal blueprint for like a middle market ecosystem, and to take the best of like how we see the Silicon Valley or the San Francisco innovation ecosystem. One thing that I like in that environment is the speed of just how things happen. I mean, and also creativity that comes out, and I think that comes from diversity. So for Sacramento, where we're at, I believe, is just kind of finding our own identity. I think, like I said, it's a phenomenal blueprint for what a collaborative ecosystem is. And I feel, in my humble opinion, that the closeness is an advantage. The closeness to the Bay Area is an advantage. And I just want to echo what I hear a lot from the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, is we're part of a Northern California mega region, and it's a plus. And just the quality of life here, the cost of capital to start anything. Yet we could improve in the areas where innovation capital has, in terms of the speed of how things move. And I think part of that is access to capital, and then just cultivating and promoting more diversity, because that creates more of an innovative mindset.
I think you can still have a competitive spirit, or be very competitive with your business, but still be friendly to others. And not everyone you meet is your competitor. But in the Bay Area, it seemed more like there's a wariness, like between everyone, and people didn't, for the most part, didn't want to do something for you unless there was something in it for them. And I don't think that is the key to having being competitive in your business. It's really just more social interaction is different.
I know you had said earlier, we were talking about capital, and one of the ideas was that, some cities have an investment network. They have either the angels or the banks or the investors. So I was curious if you wanted to expand on that a little bit, because you were talking about how banks could shift, knowing that there's an opportunity to find entrepreneurs that could be funded.
It's an interesting topic. As a former banker, it's near and dear to my heart. I had a phenomenal opportunity to speak on the Visa panel at the APEC Summit on this very topic, addressing a global audience, 22 economies. And what I told the bankers in the room is that you could borrow the best practices of a lot of these large tech companies that support startups. They, for the most part, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, you name them, they provide a startup program. They can provide up to $100,000 of free money credits just to get you started. And speaking of like capital and like financial resources, I feel the banking community needs to step up and do that for startups. And maybe I feel the loss or maybe the opportunity that's being created with Silicon Valley Bank, being acquired, and First Republic the same as well. And those were my two banks, and they were my banks for a reason. And so now I'm looking to the community banks here in the community to kind of step up and provide that level of service that can really accelerate startups, because it's the missing piece. It's one of the missing pieces that I see.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, that's certainly something, we see consistently. And, going back to your point earlier, when you're talking about, demographically, there are people that don't have access to whether their own credit cards or their own friends and family. And so the gap that exists in the financial institution is really not a lot of money. I mean, it could be $10,000 or $15,000, it could be for people, whether they're students coming out of the program, whether they're immigrants, whether they're women, like where do you find that, that could, you could get almost the most bang for your buck,
right,
in the Sacramento region, and what does that look like?
And I told a great story, and everyone in the room kind of nodded their head. I mean, imagine, I'm a startup in Davis. We employ about 8 people. One of our partners is based in India. And for me to transfer, payment to this Indian company, I have to physically go to a bank to do this. And people can explain, well, we have online transfers. Well, some of those services are available at no or low cost for larger clients, but not for startups. So the fees add up. And so it's a small thing, yet it's one of those things that if you just remove these financial friction, I mean, it just makes our job in building the business so much better. And I've spoken to the head of banks locally here, and even in San Francisco, and they're all nodding their heads, but I haven't seen it happening yet. So if somebody can just step up and do that, I'll guarantee you that it's going to accelerate a lot of these startups, and it's something so small.
So, I'm always curious. I think everybody who's doing this has been at it now for a while, whether with your business or supporting other businesses. And given where you are now, if you had the ability to go talk to yourself, then what would you tell yourself to, I don't know, whether make it easier, shortcut some of the stuff, like what's that lesson you would share?
Get a high-paying corporate job, bank the money into my retirement account, and retire earlier. Because the passion that I've had for doing this work, it doesn't show up in my bank account. It's you're not going to get rich building ecosystems. Not that I ever wanted to get rich. I just wanted to be able to retire.
How long have you been doing this?
16 years.
Okay.
What does this work cost you?
Time, lots of time. It's definitely more than a 40-hour-a-week job. My skill set is worth more than what I get paid. I have to raise my own money because I'm a nonprofit. Frustration with, Startups Act came along, the Entrepreneurship Academy, I was here before that, but Startups Act came along when the Carlson Center didn't exist, and the Growth Factory didn't exist. Startup Grind didn't exist. Startup Folsom didn't exist. So we were kind of the only player here. And Jeff and I were really passionate about helping early stage startups succeed. We did that in the early years for very, very little compensation, but we were passionate about it. So, one reason I'm a little grumpy about it right now is because I haven't had any caffeine today. But
It was 1 million cups. Come on.
She was busy. She was a tech. Take care of the tech.
It is fulfilling to see companies that I worked with when they were just an idea now be, some of them Series A, Series B, and beyond, even acquired. That was fulfilling. And my nickname is the Den Mother of Sacramento startups. So there's that, that sense of really wanting to help others out. But it can be really frustrating when you talk to what I like to refer to as the suits and the checkbooks. They're interested in investing in startups like when they're getting ready for their Series B.
Right.
They're not in the early days. So for me, it's really been a grassroots effort, and my skill set is not really in smoothing things over with the checkbooks. But thankfully, then someone like Cameron came along. Cameron is much better in that role than I am, and I think it's been really great for the ecosystem because you need to talk to those people. I just didn't think they were very fun. So
Cameron's obviously figured something out.
I was like, yeah, no, well, I think this is a good, I think I'm glad Laura went first. Because I mean, when I started kind of getting into ecosystem building, Laura and Jeff were the people I wanted to be. And that's why I joined 1 Million Cups, was because I was like, those are the people. For me, when I started out in my career, it wasn't about entrepreneurship really. It was about making Sacramento the best place that it could be. And I saw entrepreneurship as that driver going forward. I didn't know it was entrepreneurship is economic development and all the jargon that we now use. I just saw the impact and connection to people trying to build a better community. And so when I, saw Laura and Jeff, I love that she brings up the suits, because I used to suit up all the time, and she's like, people in the startup community don't wear suits. I was like, well, I kind of need to go wear this sometimes. And so naturally I've dressed down in the ecosystem, but I think she's dead on. And I think part of, if I was to go back when I started this, was starting that conversation earlier about entrepreneurship as economic development, because I found that to be what resonates with the people who can invest in ecosystem building. They love the story of entrepreneurial success, but the value proposition to them is job creation and those types of things. And I think the challenge we have as ecosystem builders is, my day-to-day job is not being an economic developer. It's supporting entrepreneurs and founders. And then it's like, well, how do I then go translate to this speak that you then will continue to fund these programs and advance that type of work? And so I think for me, is part of that is I also go back and tell friends to join this work, because I still don't see enough of people like us doing that. And I hope to inspire, students to do, my job in the future. Because that's honestly my biggest worry, is when Laura says I'm done doing this work, Monique says I'm done doing this work, then like who are my main, and same with Christy. When parenting takes off and you don't have time to do all the ecosystem building, right? Like I think that's for me a real challenge, is like building the density of people, building that connectivity. And so those would be the things I'd go back and maybe talk to myself about.
I want to go back to one thing, because you were talking about how we have to sort of think like economic developers. And so where have you found the most success, and what you measure and tell the story around when you're trying to attract funding?
Yeah, good question. So, in terms of, what we've told in terms of story is partly on activities, which I don't think is the right measurement. I think the challenge of measuring entrepreneurial ecosystem building, and it takes a long time for things to pay off, right? Like if I look at, I haven't been doing this work as long as Laura, but it was like companies I've been working with for 5 years, like they might not ever get to creating a high quality job that I'm trying to sell. So part of it is trying to capture from what's already taken place, to say this is why we need to invest in it. And so part of that is, looking at capital infusion and job opportunities. But I think where the message has made sense is for the later stage, so more scale up. So those that are raising Series A and beyond, like that's a little more tangible, because you can see that, versus this earlier work of working with someone who has an idea and helping them find, problem solution fit, right? Like that's a huge step for a startup, but it doesn't mean they've like launched a business or anything, right? And oftentimes I find the way we sometimes measure it, and like this is my personal bias and opinion, but if we're measuring based on SBA standards of getting someone to say they launched a new business by filing entities and things like that, which is our cost to the business, which might not have anything to do with them understanding who their customer is. Like, I'm not going to push someone to pay money who doesn't have an ability to do that. And so I've found sometimes challenges within that, but I'd say early revenue, are they, accessing some sort of capital that could be grants, loans, those types of things, have resonated at the earlier stages. Later stage is more of the job creation, is the one that makes sense.
Yeah, this is probably the big one for me, which is in the work that you've done here and what you've learned, what do you think is the most important thing that you could share with other communities so that they can be more successful in their work?
Any sort of like one tip?
Like one, I can give you an example. So from our perspective, we ran into the gap that we were initially funding our entire operation by running a code boot camp, the workforce development program, and it was good. We earned revenue, but it took us completely off of mission because code boot camp is sort of tangentially related. And so we continuously struggled with, well, how can we use the same workforce funding mechanism to help entrepreneurship? And so we really systematically went after tackling how do you create an industry credential around entrepreneurship, and we organized the finance sector of our community so that we could, say if we measure skills XYZ, then you'll give better access to capital, and that allowed our workforce development board to say, oh, okay, now you have an industry credential so that we can fund the training for that program. And so now our workforce training program, instead of being code boot camp, was entrepreneurial skills, and it completely aligned with us meeting our mission, and it gave us a recurring revenue stream for our work.
Were you going to say something?
I was going to approach it differently from a founder mindset, like a tip and advice, is how I was able to get everything past the idea stage. I was thinking, obviously, being capital efficient and ingenious, I reached out, or they reached out to me, the universities and these college centers, like the Global Career Center, to give me access to talent, right? Because one of the main challenges is obviously the financing part, but also access to talent. And from the very beginning, we've been able to work with interns. Some were subsidized through work study programs. Some were subsidized through other programs. That really helped jumpstart. And so in another ecosystem, if there's an opportunity where you could have part of the workforce support, however that comes, whether it's the university or the city stepping up, it's a big help. And the ROI is that by us doing this, and this is what we offer, what the entrepreneurs offer back, is that we're able to give them these entrepreneurial exposure, concrete tech skills, so that in my case, students are able to get high-paying jobs. And we've been able to demonstrate that since our start in 2019, now in 2023. Now we have an international company seeking us out because they align with our approach. And if you could somehow codify that and make that a repeatable process, it's a great way to jumpstart entrepreneurship, but also have this reciprocal contribution to economic development within that ecosystem.
Mine would be bring in people from outside of your community earlier in that process, because I have like 3 specific examples. We've used Global Entrepreneurship Week as like I would say a platform, but to kind of talk about entrepreneurship as economic development, particularly through our State of the Union. And we brought in Ian Hathaway, Faye Horowitz, and Jason Groh from Right to Start. And messages that we've talked about for a long time, when they were said by someone else outside of our community, landed with our community. So I found that to be powerful in validating and lending additional credibility to our work. And so I would bring those conversations earlier in, and then obviously you can tap into those networks for best practices. So that would be what I would do.
My tip would be, if you haven't mapped the resources in your community, you start with that. And it serves a couple things. One, it helps you to connect all those people too, because now you've got it mapped out, you know who's who. But it also shows people who could potentially fund you just what the fabric of the community is. That now there is I don't know, it just helps to demonstrate like what's here, and also like what are the gaps, what do we need.
Okay. I just have one last question.
Okay.
Anything?
Depends on what you ask.
Oh, my last question was more for, so would either of you have an example of a founder who has achieved some level of, quote, success because of the services or programs that you offered? So it sort of validates your existence here in our community. And then would you have an example of how somebody in the entrepreneur ecosystem helped you benefit and in some way, whether it's funding or resources or connection?
My favorite example is Matthew Magno with Japa, just another parking app.
Okay.
He started the program. He started the company in like an entrepreneurship class at Davis. He's been through several startup SAC programs. Has he been through any of your programs?
No, he's just giving back to our program.
Yeah. And he has given back to them. So he's been he won the Startup World Cup pitch for Sacramento and went on to the San Francisco one, where he was one of the top 10. So, but also he founded something called Plasma at UC Davis, which is an entrepreneurial boot camp for undergraduate students. So, he connected with all these programs that were existing when he was growing his business. He was still growing it, but he got to a certain point. He's giving back as well, speaking, at different events in the community, sharing his story with others. So, to me, that's like the Bradfeld startup communities.
Entrepreneurial recycling.
Poster child. Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah, I have a couple examples, but I think the one that probably is most relevant is Amy Wister. She runs a company called Rev Shop, and the first time I met her was right when I started at Sac State. And she was a lecturer at Sac State, kind of working on her business. And sure enough, 2 to 3 months later, the pandemic started, and so we took all of our programs online. And she joined our on-demand, or it was our toolkit series at that time. So she kind of went through some of those programs and was refining her business model. And then we partnered with Fourth Wave that Christy shared about, and we've been running 4 cohorts, and she was part of that first cohort. And she's gone on, I don't know how much capital she's raised, but she's gone on to raise a good amount of capital and generating revenue. And then now she's part of the launch of Minervaverse, which is, investing back into startups and growing that as well. So I think, I think when I look at success is partly to where they get to a level of growing the startup to where they're starting to give back.
And what's your company?
It's called Rev Shop. It's basically a tool that goes on to like Target and Nordstrom's to help clients go on to based on their shape, so they actually get the right clothing based on their shape profile. So one, it's kind of tackling the challenges for the companies on getting the returns where people are just buying a bunch of stuff, and then obviously with that there's a sustainability aspect. So yeah, that's kind of what she's building. So
these are great examples. In fact, I know Matthew and Amy well. Matthew and I went through the UC Davis Big Bang competition. We both were winners different years, and Amy and I are Fourth Wave alums. And so I kind of share in the kind of gifts that I got from all these resources. What it gave me was exposure, right? I mean, when I won the Big Bang, I was able to get a lot of media coverage through UC Davis, which landed me my first customers. And going through all these programs expanded my network, which created more connections and helped me get connected with Target, who is a large retail company that we're working with right now. And then that gave me exposure, to Techstars. And now we're going to be on national public television, to tell our story. That would never have happened if I didn't have the supportive community that is always out, opening doors, for us in the ways that they can. And we're just so appreciative of that. And that's the reason why we're all compelled as founders to give back, because it's priceless. And if you could do that for another founder, it just makes this ecosystem more vibrant.
Pay it forward, right?
Yeah.
So honestly, I just sense so much momentum and goodwill and everything from this community, and just assuming that all of that continues and the resources continue to come for what you need. 5 years from now, what does success look like? What are the impacts?
Yeah, if I think of that vision, I think naturally you have, I don't know that it necessarily needs to be unicorns in my perspective, but I see people wanting to move to Sacramento that have a element of like, I want to go build and be a part of like a growth of a community, and be a part of creating that opportunity. And I see that both from a lens of like people who are in their careers and want to start, but I also see it as people wanting to come to UC Davis and Sac State to be like, that's an ecosystem I want to like go, and I know that I'm going to have an amazing experience in like engaging in the community. And part of that shift is that entrepreneurship and like that ecosystem has become a much larger percentage of our employer base than government entities. And so I don't know if that's as like tactical if we want to have this number of unicorns, but I think for me, it's an ethos thing of like people wanting to move here, but having a specific type of like, I want to build and be a part of not just building my business, but building the region as a whole.
I think just in short, I'm summarizing, in 5 years, I would love to see Sacramento be seen, to be identified as an innovation capital. I mean, we're the capital of one of the largest economies in the world. That whole innovation mindset, maybe it shifts or it kind of includes us as part of the San Francisco, maybe extended towards us, or we develop this unique identity around a more conscious approach to entrepreneurship that's a little bit more connected, that really cares about others, that nurtures all the things that is kind of like anti what Silicon Valley is stereotypically known for. So developing that unique identity, being world renowned as an innovation capital, I see that happening within 5 years, just because of all the amazing work that of the people like we have here that are doing the work. And if only we get a little bit more capital, I can see that as being achievable.
So Sacramento, the innovation magnet, the place to be, the resilience economy that has more than just counting on the government, that there's the private sector that's
I think to that point is like, I would like to be a model of how capital cities that maybe have predominantly been government oriented can transform into an innovation based economy. And I think to that point, I think it's not like anti-capitalism, but I think it's like being focused on the businesses that we're building are making an impact in those industries, from food and ag, right? Like building a better world through that. Same with health and life sciences and zero emission vehicle and clean technology, right? Those have intentions to transform the world for better, and obviously there's capital opportunity within that. But I think that's core to kind of who we are as a people.
And we talk a lot about, at the high level, what Make Startups does. And so at the granular level, like we provide credentialing for entrepreneur programming. And so, when you talk about working with, as a nonprofit, like your programming could access, Department of Labor funding because we provide these credentialing things for you. And our platform, Co-Founder OS, is a digital platform that, again, sort of third party validates what your founders are going through. It gives you guys a score. It helps you unlock resources so that it can sort of like independently document like how good your program is. It allows you as an entrepreneur support organizer to mimic, you know, a lot of resources at a way that we didn't find in the marketplace existed yet. And so that's why we launched that last year.
No, we
That's
appreciate your time and opening up so that we could learn more about Sacramento. Our real hope is that this helps more communities succeed, and hopefully, you know, shining a spotlight on the work that you're doing helps you in some way as well.
Yeah.
So, what were your biggest takeaways from our interviews?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a pattern in some of these ecosystems about maybe what historically had been their communities and how they're incorporating entrepreneurship for either their next generation or for those that are there. And so for Sacramento, obviously as the capital of California, there's a lot of government agencies, there's a lot of public entities that are there. And so I think some of the entrepreneurs that are part of the Sacramento ecosystem might have industries or technologies or companies related to that. But in addition to just lifestyle, hospitality, clean tech, and the environment, the energy that Sacramento has is really healthy and ripe for their particular ecosystem.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I enjoyed about Sacramento, which was similar to Reno, is there seems to be a really tight-knit culture of people there. It's everybody in both cities talked a lot about the differentiator of their city from Silicon Valley. I think that there's a sense from everybody, and probably because we're on the West Coast and they're a little bit closer connected to Silicon Valley, that it was a really competitive place for them and they felt like it was hard to navigate. But then going into the Sacramento ecosystem, it seemed as though they felt like, you know, connectivity was much easier to achieve. And the one thing that I thought was interesting was trying to push back a little bit and challenge the notion of whether that competitiveness is actually important for businesses or not.
Well, I think at one level, when you think about entrepreneurs, I mean, they in general are taking risks, right? They in general are finding a problem, they want to solve it, they want to do it with financial resources. They could be mission driven, but they're also obviously trying to create a business, create jobs, and so there will be some holistic competition in terms of like where their customers spending their dollars. And so successful entrepreneurs will navigate that. And if you sit back and you think you're going to open a storefront and just expect people to come, that may not be necessarily the case. But I think Sacramento had the tools and the community to help elevate somebody who's like, I want to start a company, and how do they position themselves as solving a problem in their community without taking away from maybe somebody else in their community.
Yeah, and the other thing that really struck me, and it's a common story I think within entrepreneur support organizations, but trying to really, you know, get into Laura's story about, you know, the sacrifices that she's made to help grow the startup community. And I think that's a common theme, and one of the main reasons, in my view, why we do the work we do at Make Startups is to try to figure out how we solve, you know, systemically, making sure that entrepreneur support organizations have the resources they need so that they can support communities. And I guess my real hope is that we're able to follow up with her and everyone in the community to try to open up resources, whether it's through workforce development or through some of our software tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also, you know, one of the things that Cameron touched on, which we again are seeing in cities across the country, is that entrepreneurship is economic development. And so when you talk about economic development, you know, historically you might have thought, oh, let's attract a big company, or let's take a big company from another part of the country. And instead it's like, it's a truest sense of the world of like, grow your own. So grow a new company into a small company, into a big company, and then that big company provides the jobs and the tax base, and then it becomes a flywheel effect. And so entrepreneurship, being economic development, also allows itself to attract dollars either at the local, state, or federal level to say these are really, really important things where those dollars could be best served for their communities.
Okay, so Sacramento's a wrap, right? Where are we going to make startups next?
We're headed to Oakland. We're going to go to the East Bay. We're going to visit with some ecosystem builders and some entrepreneurs, and we're going to see what they're doing and catalyzing in their community.
All right, well, we can't wait for it, so we'll see you next from Oakland.
Thank you. Bye-bye.